Hi, this is a CGNTV Global Talk. I'm Han Yong Lee, your host today. 130 years ago, this country was a kind of a spiritual desert, a kind of a barren land in terms of gospel. And to become the second largest missionary sending country today, many missionaries have come to Korea and have sacrificed their youths and lives with much tears and dedication. Today, we'll talk with a missionary who came far away from home here to do life, to share his life together with people who are suffering from Hansen's disease here in Korea. So let's welcome Dr. and missionary Stanley Topol. Thanks for coming, sir.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Professor.
It's a great honor for me to have you here in person.
Thank you.
But before we engage into our talks per se, let's watch first a short video clip. Then we'll proceed with our talks.
지난 1959년 27살의 청년 의사였던 스탠 토플 선교사는 22년 동안 한국 애양원에서 사역했습니다. 한국에서 만나 결혼한 소아과 전문의 미아 토플 선교사와 함께 한센병 및 소아마비 환자들의 치료와 재활에 힘썼습니다. 그들 곁에서 예수님의 사랑을 실천했던 토플 선교사 부부는 은퇴한 이후에도 여전히 한국을 위해 기도하고 있는데요. CGNTV 글로벌대담. 이번 시간에는 한센인들의 친구였던 토플 선교사와 함께 선교사로서의 삶과 섬김의 결실에 대해 들어봅니다.
Sir, understand you're living now at the Black Mountain, North Carolina, back in the States. And I wonder what kind of a place would that be? Can you please share a little bit about Black Mountain?
Right. Professor Lee, Black Mountain is just a little town. Mm-hmm. We may have about 5,000 people there. Mm-hmm. I look around in the city of Seoul and I see these 20, 30-story buildings.
Yes.
And we have maybe 2-story buildings is the best we have. But it's a very friendly town, and many people come to visit just because it's a very cozy atmosphere.
I see. I wish I would be there one time. I'm curious, what do you do when you miss Korea? Do you miss kimchi or something like that? And do you hear from or about your former Korean patients?
Yes, it's hard to. We spent so many years in this country, you don't forget it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we don't constantly think about it. We're doing what our current activities are in retirement. However, whenever I smell kimchi, whenever I see kimchi, it's very, very good to eat.
Yeah, kimchi along with bulgogi, right?
Oh, that's right.
That's great.
Bulgogi, bibimbap, all of those things.
Too. That's my favorite too. Well, you came to Korea at the age of 27. You still look very young, handsome, but you came at a very young age, even as a single, right?
That's right.
And what was your motivation or some turning point in your life that led you to make that decision of coming to Korea at that young age?
Right. Well, of course, I wasn't thinking particularly of Korea, but I was thinking of missions for many years as a young person. Even in my middle school and high school years, I had contact with many missionaries, children. And I was reading books about missions. It really spoke to my heart. And of course, the Bible became very alive for me in my last years of high school. So all of this sort of came together so that by the time I was in my last year of high school, I had well decided that God wanted me as a missionary and that was going to be the real blessing for me if I served Him as a missionary. So I made that decision, and shortly with that came the idea of becoming a doctor. I'd never thought of being a doctor before. But I went into medicine, and God continually through the years of preparation reinforced this idea. Now, Korea came through the door of China because I was very interested in China missions and China Inland Mission and Hudson Taylor and things like that. At any rate, the communists closed off China, of course, to missions. But I was still interested in the Orient. I worked under Chinese cooks as a teenager.
I see.
And that gave me another interest. At any rate, I applied to the mission board when I was in my surgical training, and they said, we need you immediately for a need in Korea. And that brought me to the Aeangwon, to the leprosy work.
Well, what was your first impression of Korea? I understand you came back in 1959 to Korea. And how do you remember the environment of Aeangwon when you first came there?
Well, Aeangwon was a very rural, isolated place when I got there. Today, if you look around, there are oil refineries, there's an airport, there's a highway, high-speed highway, and high-speed trains and buses. So it's hard to imagine what it was like then, but it was just a dusty, isolated, rural community stuck out into the Honam Bay with fishing boats around it. And the patients in the leprosarium were just raising garlic, chickens and pigs. That was their life. And they had a community of their own. It was surrounded with barbed wire. We had a gate. No one went in and out of that place. 1,200 patients. And they were contained in there. So they had to have special permission to go out.
I see. What a change since then, right?
It is.
I see. I guess at first when you came to Korea, you had many inconveniences, like language and different cultural background, communication, food, customs here. And I wonder, what was it like?
Well, it was fascinating for me. True, there was a lot of difficulties. It was cold. There was very little heating. The homes were not heated. A little ondo floor was about all we had. And transportation was hopping off and on hopsungs.
I see.
And
you came from North Carolina at that time to Korea?
Oh, no, I came from Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, Georgia. So what a difference, right?
It was, it was. But they did have streetcars, old streetcars on the Seoul streets that had been brought from Atlanta, Georgia.
I see. So
and they still had some of the Atlanta, Georgia streets on them. So that was very nice.
You sort of felt at home.
Yeah. But anyway, it was very different. But, you know, I was a young man, 27 years old.
Yeah.
This was exciting for me. I liked the difference.
I see.
And whenever I traveled, whether it was in a train or a bus, I had my nose always to the glass, looking out and taking it in for a long time. But the language was a big,
great barrier for you.
A big tough one, yeah,
tough for you.
right.
But can you recall any episode that you had because of this cultural and language difference?
Well, one thing was that everybody wanted to speak English to me.
I see.
And I was trying to learn Korean. So sometimes I would say, I'm sorry. When they were speaking to me in English, I'm sorry, but my Korean is very poor.
I see.
And that sort of turned them off, and we could get going in Korean.
I see.
But anyhow, the language was tough, and a good way to learn language, I stayed in a Korean family, and I could play games with the children.
I see. What kind of a game was that?
Well, we were moving some kind of little markers we moved around the board.
I see.
And so
Yunori, kind of.
That's right. So that was an interesting way to pick up some natural language.
Thankfully, I heard that you came to Korea as a single, right? And you met a suitable, lovely wife here in Korea. And I wonder if you can share a little bit about what kind of a ministry you had with your wife. She is Mrs. Mia Toffler, right?
That's right.
So how you met her here in Korea, and what kind of ministry you were doing with her here in Korea?
Well, my wife she was born in Norway.
From Norway?
Yeah, she had medical training in Norway and the United States. Then she was sent by Norway from a Norwegian mission.
I see.
She was to take up the supervision of a World Vision hospital in Kimpo,
I see.
which was just being built then. She came to this country to do that work, and the hospital could not be completed for lack of funds at that time. So she was in training at Yonsei for Korean language.
I see.
And then she got some money from Norway for children of leprosy patients.
I see.
And she was trying to find out where in Korea this money could be used. And someone told her, Dr. Topple, there's a man named Dr. Topple down there who's doing leprosy work. Why don't you go see him?
I see.
And so she thought I was an old man, probably with a large family. Anyhow, she arranged by phone to come, and we met.
I see. That was God's providence.
It was God. And another thing is my grandfather told me that he had read in the World Vision magazine that there was a picture he saw of a lovely young doctor coming from Norway. So he wrote me a letter. Said, Stan, you better look up this gal when she comes to Seoul. It looks like it'd be a good one for you to knock on the door and talk to.
How all things work together for good. Huh?
Absolutely.
That's great, sir. Understand that at the older times in Korea, and still there are some remainings that Hansen disease, people with Hansen disease, they were treated with prejudices. And I wonder with what kind of heart and mind you treat and meet with the patients who are suffering with the Hansen's disease.
Well, it's true there was great prejudice against those with leprosy back in those days especially. And for instance, the children of leprosy patients, even though they didn't have the disease, were not allowed to go to public school.
So the center was almost like a quarantine, right?
The what was?
Quarantine?
Oh, quarantine, yeah.
It was almost like that.
Yeah, it was fear of contagion, right. Though leprosy we found is not that highly contagious. But there was that great fear. And the patients who were so ashamed when they were diagnosed with leprosy, and their families were ashamed. Even family members would commit suicide when one of their relatives there, a brother or sister, was found to have leprosy.
Because the relative is a...
Yeah. So a big part of our job was not just medicine, not just giving out DDS for leprosy and doing surgery, but it was to educate the community.
I see.
We
It's
went
kind
into
of a
schools.
holistic approach.
Absolutely. And these people, of course, their spirits were also in great need of help, as well as their bodies. So the Christian gospel was a very natural way to minister to these people. And they embraced the gospel because God loved them. There was no prejudice in God's heart. So it was a very exciting and wonderful ministry to be in.
I see. So you didn't have any kind of a hesitation to approach them and embrace them with your heart and
No,
mind
we
and
shook
wisdom.
hands, and I, of course, as a doctor, I had my hands on them all the time. But the leprosy bacillus was, we found that only about 10% of the population of the world is susceptible to leprosy. We have a natural immunity in 90% of the people.
90%,
Of course, so there were those things, and they were friendly, and we were just, after a few months, you didn't think about them as being different.
Lovely people, right?
Yeah. They had a sense of humor. They were intelligent. They were organized. And we loved the Lord. It was...
Our appearance can sometimes deceive, right?
That's right.
Our perception of our
and even
neighbors.
the patients among themselves, if someone had lost their nose or had facial paralysis,
I see.
They would get a nickname.
Nicknames?
From their other patients,
I see.
regarding their deformity. It was a joke.
I see, kind of a funny nicknames.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I heard that you have created sort of a cost-effective ways to approach the poor patients. I heard that you invented ways to help poor patients. And to economize the cost. And I wonder, what was that?
Well, you know, Professor Lee, my parents came out of the Depression
I see.
Years.
Like in 1929.
In the around 1930 or so.
30s.
I was born in 32.
I see.
And so they had a very, my dad had to work 2 jobs at the same time. And money was very tight in those days when I was being raised. And so I sort of picked up that.
Korea then was a very poor country.
Korea was poor, but even the United States, we had to pinch our pennies.
I see.
At any rate, I took that same attitude. I was trying to stretch a buck to get as much as we could from the money that we had. And so we incorporated a lot of cost-saving measures. Another thing is I worked in a city hospital in Atlanta that used a lot of cost-saving measures in regards to medications and so forth. And I was able to take that and use many of those systems here at the AYUN-1.
I see. Can you elaborate a little bit about the specifics, what you really did to minimize the cost?
Well, one thing is, for instance, we had our ointments. We could make our own ointments by taking the
kind
ingredients.
of a homemade ointments.
Right, we grind it up. And then
great.
for a receptacle, we live by, the AYUN-1 is by the ocean. We use the seashells
I see.
to put the ointment in and
where did you get the idea?
I'm not sure.
I see, okay.
And then for suture in surgery, we use fishing line.
Fishing?
Yeah, you know, nylon fishing
nylon,
line. We'd sterilize it. It was fine.
Well, you have to use the mono nylon, right?
That's
but
right.
you can use the fishing line.
Mono nylon.
That's great.
And of course, you'd have different strengths of fishing line for different suturing jobs.
And how do you sterilize the fishing line?
It will accept the high pressure autoclaving.
I see, autoclaving.
It would do that. You couldn't do it many times, or it would become brittle. But once or twice, it was okay.
That's great ideas, especially to be applied in the mission fields, even today, right?
Sure. We made our own sokok punte, the plaster of Paris. We would buy the materials. It's really crinoline that is used in women's women's clothing, and we get rolls of that. And then we buy plaster of Paris in bags. And we had our staff who would rub the plaster of Paris into the crinoline, roll it up, and then we could put the plaster on.
Sounds you're very creative, sir. Anyways, I heard that while attending patients, you're always sharing gospel at the same time. And I wonder, when gospel was shared, how was the reception from the patients? Did they respond positively to your sharing gospels? And also, what was a Korean Christian's faith life like at that time? Can you remember, recall a little bit?
Sure. Well, the patients were very, very grateful for what we were doing. And we had many deformed people, whether they were deformed with leprosy or deformed with polio. And so we were trying to make them whole again with plastic surgery, reconstructive work, straightening out limbs, allowing people to walk. So they were very grateful, and for us to speak of the gospel that would change men's lives, that fit very nicely.
Not only physical change, but spiritual changes. This kind of holistic approach to the patient. I see.
And I had our staff were very strong Christians, and they witnessed to the patients. I'm speaking now of the children with polio.
I see.
Very much. We had them for multiple procedures, multi-stage operations. So we'd have them for a long time. They'd get to know us, and we had many opportunities to share the gospel. And our leprosy patients really embraced the gospel, and they would come and pray for our other patients.
And how was their faith life like?
Well, they in good Korean fashion, they began with the 새벽 기도.
I see. Typical Korean 새벽 기도, right?
Right, the early
Were you
morning
in the
prayers.
새벽 기도 all the time together? Did you go for 새벽 기도
Not
yourself?
very good.
Not very good.
I was living in Suncheon, would come out back and forth to the Aeangwon, which is about 12-mile
I see.
commuting.
Yeah, Yosu to Suncheon, back and forth.
Yeah, well, the colony was halfway between Yosu and Suncheon. We were halfway. So we didn't go to Yosu that much. Anyhow, to get back to the question, the patients were coming onto the wards, the leprosy patients would come onto the wards and they would evangelize.
I see.
And it was very amazing to these patients who had other diseases that leprosy patients could be so happy.
I see.
Had a real vital faith. They had something that these patients didn't have.
I see.
Even though they had leprosy, they had a great joy and power in their hearts and lives. Even though they were uneducated, they had a lot of wisdom.
I see. It's God's given wisdom.
Right.
That's great. Would you share if you have any patients or episodes that you still remember and you keep in your heart?
Right. Well, there were many stirring things that I felt. I remember, for instance, when the patients were gathered together talking to me, and they said, you know, who ever heard of a dog becoming a man?
Dog?
A dog becoming a man. But through the gospel that you brought to us, we who are treated like dogs now have found ourselves as men. And that meant so much to me.
I see.
Also, you know, I have a story I tell about the man who spoke of his leg of blessing. And he came as a young boy, and he had a fracture of the femur that was not united and had surgeries to clean up the infection. And anyhow, he was with us for a long time. He was from the islands. And his mother was a mudung. She was a shaman. Mudang. She was a shaman priestess on her island.
I see.
And this man, this young boy, he really took the gospel into his heart, and he took it back to his mother and to the island. And eventually all his mother and all of the people in his village and on that little island. And so they then sent him to seminary. And then he was out of seminary and was preaching in a little country church. And I went to visit. I didn't know he was there.
You didn't know, you just went there and you came across.
Yes, by. And he said, I know, you don't know who I am, but I know who you are.
That's great.
He told the congregation the story. And he said, and I call this my leg of blessing.
I see. Well, you just mentioned all the beautiful people and episodes, but any bad experience that you can recall?
Well, we, of course, had some patients, like every doctor, you have some patients that don't make it, who die. I remember one day we had a boy who was run over by the train, and he lost both of his legs. And he was losing blood, and they raced him from the train down to our hospital, and we took him to the... So that was a sad case because we couldn't save him. That always hurts a doctor, but we had other cases that were, you know, in managing the leprosy colony, we sometimes, the patients were not happy with what you were doing. And so we had a couple of demos, and I had to stand up and talk to the patients and deal with those things. But it settled down.
I see.
We came through that well enough.
So mostly good memories, right?
That's exactly right, yeah.
Well, in Yosu, that's it. There is a village after your own name, and I heard that there is a Sungma Maul.
Tosung Maul.
Tosung Maul, right. And how did it come to be established there after your own name? And
Well,
it
you
must
know,
be a great honor for you.
Well,
I wonder if I have any city
I think
under
they
my
were
name.
just looking around for a name and they decided on that one. But the story is that with leprosy medications, we were able to slowly wipe out leprosy. We started out with 1,200 patients, and the numbers came down. And so we had many patients who didn't need to be in a leprosy colony.
I see.
That we had to discharge them to resettlement villages.
I see.
So we had one resettlement village in Nam One named after Mr. Boyer.
I see.
Who was the pastor, who was a missionary pastor. And then they had a second group some years later who we cut off half of the colony and sold it to the patients to live there as their own private property.
I see. That would be still a colony of people with the Hansen's disease.
Yes, but it was cut in half.
Cut in half.
And so the part that was given over to cured patients, there we called, they named after me.
I see.
That was their idea, not mine.
But anyways, great honor, right?
Yeah.
It's wonderful. After spending a precious part of your life, doing life with them for over 20 years, I heard that you then left for Kenya, Africa, right? From Korea to Kenya. And I wonder what was the reason for that, that after Korea you went to Africa?
Well, we left Korea because Korea was grown up. You know, they didn't need missionaries.
That was back in
1981.
81,
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, Korea had become self-sufficient, in not only economically, but in the life of the church and in leadership and so forth.
See.
And for missionaries to stay would be counterproductive.
I see.
Because the church had really become to maturity. It's like a child, you know, when he gets to be 21, you don't want to treat him. He has to take off on his own.
I see.
And
it's a grown-up boy, right?
That's right.
Living home.
And Korea was a grown-up nation. And so we felt it was time for us to go. Our children had finished high school, were finishing, and they needed to go to college. And we felt as though for us to be in the United States while they were in college was important. We had 4 girls.
I see.
And for them to be close enough to get to their mom was important. But anyhow, after they all finished university and college years, we still felt God's call to be missionaries, but we didn't need to come back to Korea. So we looked around, I investigated, and we found Kenya was a country that fit our situation.
I see.
It was welcoming us. The Presbyterian Church of East Africa welcomed us. We went out under the Presbyterian Mission Board again, and we served there steadily for about 10 years, and then we were going back and forth after we retired.
And were you doing the same type of ministry there?
Yeah,
working with the Hansen's disease, patients with Hansen's
very
disease?
little leprosy in Africa now.
I see.
So it was mostly osteomyelitis, infection of bone,
I see.
and a lot of traffic accidents. But children with deformities was the big one. Many children with clubfoot, where they're born with their feet turned in, and many children with diseases from drinking the water that would affect their bones.
I see.
I had fluorosis of the bone. And we had bow legs where the knees are turned in.
I see.
Or we had genu valgus where they're out. So I say we're like John the Baptist. We're making the crooked places straight.
So you're basically an orthopedic surgeon, right?
Yes, that's right.
See. There's a saying that family, the relationship between parents and children is one of bonding, debonding, and rebonding.
Yeah.
So you went through that kind of a process, right, with Korea, bonding, debonding, and you're coming back now.
That's right.
That's great. It's
We're
really
rediscovering a wonderful friendship.
While you were doing missions work here in Korea, maybe you had witnessed Korean church's growth. There was a drastic, dynamic change here in Korea, and and you are the witness of that. And I wonder what was it like?
Well, what shall I say? I of course, was in medical work, and I was spending all day long in the hospital. So I wasn't watching the Korean church grow in that sense, like a evangelistic missionary would have been. However, you know, I could sense that the church was steadily becoming stronger, not only in numbers, but also in becoming more organized, systemized, and getting into foreign missions. You know, that's the real thing when a church no longer is receiving but starting to give and starting to go out. And we were beginning to see that wonderful change. Many of the mission hospitals were sending groups to Bangladesh and to other countries of the world in teams to do work. So yes, all of that was maturing of the church.
I guess definitely you witnessed the physical, the outer growth of the of Korean church. But I wonder if you felt sort of you could identify pitfalls in terms of a spirituality of a Korean church.
Well, there's always the danger when you're working with human hearts to have pride, and we could sense that often for many pastors it was a difficult thing because, you know, instead of pointing to Jesus, if you're pointing too much to the local pastor or the leadership of the church, or people are using the church for their own benefit.
Preaching prosperity theology. Right?
That's true too. So all of those things were entering in. We also had a situation of finances. You know, the mission, as it was leaving Korea, had a lot of valuable property in the big cities, just like Seoul. And this property had to go into the life of the Korean church. And then there could be a little fight, a little back and forth on who was going to get it and how it was going to be used. So that was not a happy transition, but it had to be done. We had to work through that.
I see. Okay. Well, what was your driving force, a motivation that made you to dedicate for this long time as a missionary? Because it's easy to start the ministry, but not to carry on for this long. And I wonder what was that motivation and generating force along that process?
Well, you know, it just was a very satisfying thing for me personally. And my wife was a partner with me in this.
I see.
You know, she's doing dermatology.
I see.
And her work also was expanding. She would see many leprosy patients. Well, people with early leprosy, they didn't know what their disease was. They'd come to a dermatology clinic.
I see.
And then
what a perfect combination, right? Dermatology and orthopedics.
I think so. We call it skin and bones.
Yeah, skin and bones, literally, right?
Right. But so there's a lot of real rich satisfaction in that. And things were constantly, the country was coming up. You know, we could see roads coming in and Koreans becoming very self-confident. Instead of feeling like we're a poor little nation who can't do anything, they realized they had a lot of, they were coming up in this world.
I see.
And we were part of that because our institution was coming up. The work we were doing was constantly expanding. And we were taking leprosy out into the counties around and so we were serving, you know, 1 million, 2 million people around us, as well as those in the hospital. So all those things were elevating and encouraging us to stay on.
And at the core, you had this mission drive, kind of a divine inspiration going on.
Sometimes that's true. Yes, I think the very same things that got me started were the same things that had to continue in my heart. And, you know, I've often felt in working in mission work that we can do so many good things for people, helping them physically and all, and even witnessing to them. But unless my heart is staying in tune with God, I can drift away from that, and it just gets to be sort of a mechanical operation. And so, you know, all through my life, I felt I need to have times of quietness, times of renewal of my soul with God. And our family, we had to do that as a family too. Every day we have devotions together with the children, and my wife and I pray together. And that's so important to keep ourselves in tune with God.
There was kind of a driving force that transcends our understanding and the circumstances.
That's right.
And other external factors that would just would work in synergy along with that. Not only internal motivation, but external elements.
Sure. Well, that external influence would come from Christian Koreans around me.
I see.
And also from my fellow missionaries. We had a great mission of about 50 Presbyterian missionaries. Yeah. And there are many people who had very smart people.
I see.
And people with good humor. And we get together and we would worship and sing and had much camaraderie together. And that was so important.
And it's down to earth.
Yeah, and you know, Jesus said that we're not to go out one by one, but we're go in teams.
2 by 2.
Yeah, we need each other.
I see.
And so I received a lot of blessing and reinforcement. And even today, those people are all dying that I worked with, you know, fellow missionaries. But we felt closer to them than our brothers and sisters very often.
So you had this internal motivation along with that team working together.
Right. Yeah.
And there was a driving force
to
carry on your missionary this long time.
Yeah.
That's great, sir. Well, you mentioned before that you went to Kenya, Africa, and I wonder if you came across Korean missionaries in Kenya. For instance, I grew up in Brazil. I'm a Korean, but while here in Korea, when I come across Brazilians, I just feel like, hey, they're my family, right? Though I'm not purely Brazilian, right?
Exactly.
How was your feeling when you came across the Korean missionaries in Kenya, and how you did get along with them?
Well, we didn't come, we weren't with them every day by any means, but from time to time we would cross paths. And the Korean ambassador to Kenya was a fine Christian.
I see.
And he invited us to his home, for instance, and also Korean missionaries. And we had a good contact there. Also, there's a Korean church in Nairobi, and we would occasionally attend service, and I could hear the
Korean again.
Yeah. And get a little Korean diet as well. So that was good. And we have a Korean man working with us for about 20 years now in Africa, who is a prosthetist. And he worked with us in Shinpung at the Ayangwon.
I see.
But when we went to Africa, he told his wife about a few years later, he said to his wife, we're going to Africa and work with the Topples.
I see.
So he's been there ever since.
I see. Time to time, are there any occasions that you feel like you're Korean inside?
Well, I guess so. I can certainly sense things that are going on that probably came from a Korean origin. And then the same with the Africans. You know, we've been there long enough so that when I see a black man in the United States, I feel like I want to go over and tap him on the shoulder.
I see.
Yeah.
God's global citizen.
That's right.
I see. In sum, what would be the implication, meaning of Korea in your life?
Well, Korea.
It's a very short question, but not easy question, right?
No, it's not. Korea is something that makes us feel very proud. Because we're proud of what Korea has done. We're so proud of what God has accomplished for His own glory through the people of Korea, how they've responded. Because we've had opportunity to work with people in many parts of the world, in India and Afghanistan and many different countries in Africa, but nowhere have we seen
I see.
the response to the gospel as we've seen it in the Korean people. And we just pray that it will not be lost, that zeal. Yeah.
Okay, nowadays Korea is sending out missionaries. I heard over 25,000 missionaries, Korean missionaries across the globe. And as last word for today, what would be, would you remind Korean Christians of the importance of world mission?
Well, God has given us so much. And for us to just hold it in ourselves, it's going to die. But as Jesus said, unless the seed is planted in the ground, it will not sprout and bring forth fruit. And so we need to be willing to let our personal lives, our personal wants die to the kingdom of God so that good fruits will be brought forth. And, you know, I think of that too. We check a person's health by putting a thermometer in their mouth. I think the health of a church is the thermometer is missions.
I see.
If the missions is strong in a church, whether it's an individual church or a national church, that is a sign of health. If it's not there, if we're just trying to serve ourselves and be a happy club and get a little more joy in our personal lives and not thinking about God's great kingdom.
So you're saying about not a attractional church, but missional church.
That's right.
That's great. Sir, thanks so much for your precious words, and we pray for much health and blessing for you.
Thank you. Thank you
so
for
much,
letting
sir.
me share.
Yeah. Today, we talked with the doctor and missionary Stanley Topol, who served the Hansen patients for over 20 years. And this conversation renewed my resolution too. And even right now, many missionaries are working on foreign lands, far away from home to witness gospel. And as we conclude, I wish all of us Christians could be channels of the gospel and bridges of missions. Thanks for watching. God bless.
이 프로그램은 시청자 여러분의 소중한 후원으로 제작됩니다.